4.
Good morning and welcome to today's Academy Finance Professionals Power Hour. I'm just going to wait another minute or so just to let a few more people join the event. Hope everyone's well today. Okay. See the numbers are going up. Okay, so today's session is about related party transactions and will be presented by Jane Ringrose and Lee Turner. Before I hand over to the team, I'll run through some key points. This session is being recorded and will be shared after the event. Please use the chat function to ask questions relevant to today's session or upvote any questions that you like. The team will endeavour to answer as many related party transaction questions as possible allocated at the end of the presentation. So please ensure the questions are relevant to today's session and avoid reference to specific cases. And finally, we would appreciate if you could take a minute to complete the survey at the end of the session. We will put the link into the chat, as your feedback is very important to us. Okay, so now I want to hand over to Jane, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jane Ringrose, and I work in the Schools Financial Support and Oversight Directorate in the Education and Skills Funding Agency. I'm joined today by my colleague, Lee Turner. So I'm just going to run you through the agenda. If we could move on to the next slide, please. The next slide, please. Thank you. So in today's session, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to related party transactions. So this will cover what a related party is, what a related party transaction is, the statutory requirements for transactions with related parties, and the requirements by the ESFA. So I'm also going to update you on ESFA's policy changes for transactions with related parties that are effective from the 1st of September, and tell you a bit about why these changes have been made. Lee will then talk you through the themes, support and best practice, and where you can find further support and guidance. So as Natalie's mentioned, please do post questions using the chat function, as there will be a Q&A session at the end. And again, if I can just remind you not to ask questions that relate to your trust or to a specific transaction with a related party, as we're unable to answer these today. I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. I'm just going to start by giving you a brief explanation as to what a related party is. So a related party is either a person or an entity that is related to a reporting entity. So i.e. that's a person or an entity that is related to the Academy Trust. And a person is a related party if that person or a close member of that person's family has control or joint control, significant influence, or they're a member of the key management personnel of the reporting entity or a parent of the reporting entity. And this can include, but it isn't limited to, the trustees, members and accounting officer of the Academy Trust and their close family members, such as a child, spouse or a domestic partner. So an entity is related to an Academy Trust if it is a member of the same group, an associate or a joint venture of the Academy Trust or of the same third party, if it is controlled or jointly controlled by two or more of the persons that I've just mentioned, or where one or more such person has significant influence or interest over an Academy Trust. So this can include, but it isn't limited to, Academy Trust subsidiary companies and sponsor organisations. So for a full explanation of a related party, you should refer to either the Financial Reporting Standard or the Charities SORP. If you're unsure about a related party relationship, you should seek your own professional advice. So all Academy Trusts will have related parties, so it's inevitable that most trusts will at some stage enter into a related party transaction. So what is a related party transaction? So the Financial Reporting Standard defines a related party transaction as a transfer of resources, services or obligations between a reporting entity and a related party, regardless of whether a price is charged. And related party transactions can either be an incoming transaction, such as the donation of goods, services, property or money by a related party to the Academy Trust, or it can be an outgoing or expenditure transaction, such as the purchase of goods or services. So, for example, it could be IT, training, consultancy, HR, or the use of tradespeople by the Academy Trust. Move on to the next slide, please. So, what are the statutory requirements for transactions with related parties? So, as company directors, the Academy trustees must comply with their statutory duties. So this means Academy trustees must follow the Academy Trust Articles of Association, which sets out the trustees' powers and their purpose. They must promote the success of the Academy Trust by acting in its best interest, considering the consequences of decisions and any reputational impact. They must use independent judgment and not allow other people to control their powers as a trustee. And they must exercise reasonable care, skill and diligence and use any relevant knowledge that they have. They must avoid conflicts of interest where loyalties might be divided and follow any process set out in the Articles of Association. They must not accept benefits from a third party, and this could cause a conflict of interest, and they must declare interest in potential or existing transactions or arrangements and declare where there may be personal gain. So for the Academy Trust, the Trust must disclose all transactions. So that's both incoming and outgoing transactions with persons and entities that are closely related to their trust in their accounts. So this includes transactions between its subsidiary, associate or joint venture, trustee pay, and other benefits and trustee expenses. Where there's no such transaction has taken place, this also needs to be stated in the Trust's accounts. And disclosure not only provides accountability and transparency, but it also demonstrates that potential conflicts of interest are being identified and reported, and it allows users to gain a full understanding of the transaction with the related party and any issues that might have influenced this. So what are ESFA's requirements for transactions with related parties? So in addition to the statutory requirements, ESFA requires Academy Trusts to maintain an up-to-date register of interests, and this must capture relevant business and financial interests of members, trustees, local governors, senior employees, and the interests of close family members as described in the Academy Trust Handbook. The Trust must also publish the relevant business and financial interests of its members, trustees, local governors, and accounting officers. And all contracts and other agreements with related parties must be reported to ESFA in advance of the contract or agreement commencing or being renewed. ESFA's prior approval must be sought for contracts or other agreements with a related party for the supply of goods or services where these exceed the approval threshold. And Trust must also pay no more than costs for goods or services provided by certain individuals and organisations as specified in the Academy Trust Handbook. And ESFA requires Trust to confirm in their accounts that transactions with related parties were conducted in accordance with the requirements of the Academy Trust Handbook and with their financial regulations and procurement procedures. Have the next slide, please. Okay. So for 2023, we've made some changes to the policy requirements for transactions with related parties. So I'm just going to give you a bit of detail about why we've done this, and then I'll move on to the policy changes. So as you're probably already aware, there's been a programme of work which has been taking place to ensure that ESFA's financial oversight is proportionate, appropriate and as least burdensome on the sector as possible. And some of you may have delved into the Parallel on the 19th of July, which spoke about this in more detail. But to summarise, the department has engaged with a range of Academy Trust CFOs, CEOs and reps from sector bodies to seek views on how we can simplify existing frameworks. And the requirements for related party transactions have featured quite heavily in these discussions, and we've heard a strong message from the sector that the RPT process is unpopular with trusts. And it's been suggested that the approval requirements for transactions which involve Other schools, colleges and universities were bureaucratic and caused significant burdens on the trust, and that this was worse for larger trusts. In addition, the requirements were stifling collaboration and innovation within the sector, and you've told us that the £20,000 approval threshold was not proportionate and it was considered too low, and that the at-cost policy was difficult to understand, with trusts shying away from this and often seeking more expensive alternatives. During our stakeholder engagement, we've heard several recommendations that could ease the burdens caused by the requirements for transactions with related parties. So we've taken this feedback on board and we've further refined this to ensure that it's reflected what we can do in this space and to ensure that it provided ESFA with appropriate oversight and assurance. And the changes that we've introduced for 2023 were then tested with the stakeholder group and they've been positively received. So we're already looking at what more we can do in this space for 2024 edition of the Academy Trust Handbook. But for 2023, we've made 5 changes to the RPT policy. Have the next slide, please. Okay. And what are the RP changes for 2023? So the 2023 edition of the Academy Trust Handbook sets out the RPT changes which come into effect from the 1st of September. So these are the removal of the approval requirements for related party transactions with a college, university or a school which is a sponsor of the Academy Trust, and for transactions which are with state-funded schools or colleges. This also includes other academies. So although ESFA will no longer need to approve these transactions, Trust must still continue to submit these in advance of the contract start date via the RPT online form. However, these will be declared only and they will be deemed as meeting the at-cost requirements. You should note that this concession does not include transactions which are with a subsidiary company of these establishments. We've also increased the approval threshold for transactions which are with a supplier that's not included under the first bullet point on the slide. So previously, the approval threshold applied to transactions with a supply of goods or services that exceeded £20,000. And from the 1st of September, ESFA approval is now required for transactions exceeding £40,000. In addition to this, we've removed the cumulative element. So this means that the £40,000 approval threshold only applies to single transactions with the same supplier. So we're no longer going to aggregate the value of transactions with the same supplier in the same financial year. So the fourth change that we have made is to confirm in the Academy Trust Handbook that the advanced reporting of contracts or other agreements with related parties also includes those which are being renewed. And finally, we have changed the process for novel, contentious and repercussive related party transactions. So these must now be submitted using the RPT online form and not the ESFA inquiry form. And this will support with the consistency of your reporting for RPTs. Just want to confirm that at this point that there's no changes to the requirements for transactions between an Academy Trust and its religious authority. So services which relate to the Trust's religious character and ethos will continue to be declared only, and transactions which include any element of traded services still require prior approval, and that's where the value of the transaction will now exceed £40,000. Move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm just going to hand over to Lee and Lee's going to talk you through the rest of the presentation.
Hi everyone, thanks Jane as well for that. So I'll just quickly reintroduce myself. So my name's Lee Turner and I'm National Delivery Lead for Related Party Transactions. So in essence, I work on the team that review all RPT approval requests which come through the online form, and we work through the evidence that's been submitted alongside that and all of that submitted information. We meet with Academy Trusts as part of our role as well to review submissions and help support with the reporting requirements. And I think, again, those meetings are really important for us because it helps build those relationships with the sector. And I think it helps us understand some of the challenges that you face as well. Again, that helps us to come back round and work with colleagues like Jane in our policy team and look at how we improve our messaging and some of our supportive material that's out there. I think the takeaway, what I'm trying to hopefully get through there, is that we're always happy to discuss and have conversations. For the second half of today's session, I think it'd be really useful for us to go through some of the different compliance themes that our team worked through as part of our approval request, and hopefully bring to life a little some of the requirements in the trust handbook and some of the other statutory requirements that Jane touched on as well. As part of each theme, what we can do as well is look at some of the practical kind of supporting documents or evidence that will help with that RPT approval request. This probably take around 15, 20 minutes, but what that should hopefully give us time as well at the end is to just cover any Q&As that are being published and kind of populated in the chat. So before we go through the RPT journey, then I think a good starting point is the slide that's on screen now, and look at what the current position is and what are the main findings that we see in relation to RPTs, which is from the ESFA assurance work. So the most recent findings that we have are complete, I suppose academic year is 21-22 at the moment. Just as a quick recap, the assurance work is a review of Academy Trust financial statements, Academy funding audits, financial management and governance reviews, and also school resource management self-assessment checklists as well. So that's all wrapped up within that assurance work. What that currently tells us is the second highest of modified regularity opinions currently for 21-22 are in relation to RPTs. And again, that's, I think, similar year on year now for maybe the last two previous academic years. When we look at those findings, again, breaks down into the three sections you can see on screen there. So number one is that prior approval wasn't sought. So this is where prior approval wasn't obtained from the ESFA beforehand, greater than the 20,000 threshold. But as James now touched on, that will change from 1st of September. Number two was the cost policy not adhered to. So this is where there was a requirement for those services to be provided at cost. However, these weren't at cost or potentially not able to be evidenced they were at cost. And three, pecuniary interests or declarations were not in place or published on the Trust website. Again, that phrase pecuniary interests has just had a slight update in the Trust handbook for this year to hopefully translate a little easier, and that's now referred to as financial interest. So yeah, that gives us a good, I think, starting point for the current position for RPT. So if we could just move to the next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So the best place to start is the online form. So this is the start of probably all declaration and approval journeys, and that's called the Identity and Access Management System, or IDAMS for short. And this is used to report all RPTs. And again, there is specific guidance out there on gov.uk that we will circulate after today. Some helpful things to know when sort of using the form or submitting via the form, that where the transaction exceeds 40,000 threshold, and again, not one of the educational supplies that Jane covered as part of the changes for this year, that you will be required to upload supporting evidence as part of that submission. Again, documents can be uploaded through there, or it can be a link. So if there's a web address or a link you want to refer us to as part of that submission, that can be sent through the online form as well. Currently, you do need to have all the information to hand before starting to complete the online form, as it isn't possible to save and submit later. I say currently because that will change very shortly from the 1st of September, and you will be able to sort of save and continue those journeys, but I'll touch on that right at the end of this slide because there's a few other changes alongside that as well. So once we receive your approval request via the system, what we'll do if we need to request further information is that we will do that through the online form as well. And whenever we do any sort of interaction through the online form, it'll always trigger an email to you as well, just to let you know that that's there. When we've reached a decision on the related party transaction, again, that will come through the online form, and it will always send that email notification just to prompt you as well. In terms of usability, the form at the moment allows you to submit submissions at least one academic year in advance. So for now, you can submit for 23-24, but very shortly when we get to the 1st of September, you'll be able to submit right up until 24-25. Once an RPT's been submitted through the online form, that comes through to an ESFA caseworker within our team, and they'll work on that to make sure your request is resolved. What we aim to do is respond to all RPT approval requests within 10 working days. Again, that's really important for us to provide a timely response, and we appreciate, we don't want to cause any delays where possible. If there is insufficient evidence provided, then in those instances we might need to reach out for further information, and wherever we do that, we will always give 20 days for a response. I touched on some changes to the form just a bit earlier, so again, just to follow on, as well as the engagement we've been doing from a policy perspective, what we have been doing as well as engaging with actual users of the online form, focusing really on a few things: functionality and usability. So again, if anybody's on the call who's supported that user research with us, thank you so much. What you'll see are several changes from the 1st of September. I think in summary, the headline ones are being able to save and return to a submission. I think that was really key feedback that we received, that it can be very busy trust life, and that functionality will absolutely help with submitting RPT requests. You'll see additional evidence prompts and text as you kind of work through the journey as well, just to sort of remind of some of the useful documents that might help. And I think overall, you should hopefully find it more streamlined and much sort of easier from a user perspective. Because there's been a number of changes, what we'll do nearer the 1st of September is we are planning to share an online form demonstration. So we'll share a sort of demo or recording of what the changes look like and how that changes some of maybe the approval and declaration journeys. So that should hopefully be coming out mid to late September, but do look out for that one, and we'll make sure that we share that nearer the time. If we could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So if I look at themes, then what our team work through as part of approval requests. So the first thing we look at is reporting in advance, and that's referenced in the new trust handbook as in 5.41. So as an academy trust, you must ensure that all RPTs are submitted before the transaction start date. Again, as it highlights there on the slide, when we talk transaction as well, that can also mean contract or agreement start date as well. So if we refer to that through the rest of today, it can absolutely mean all three of those things. When you submit on the online form, it will automatically capture the submission date. And what you can do is, if you have a separate contract or agreement, you can upload that as supporting evidence as well to evidence that that's been reported in advance of that start date. When we look at contracts as well, because a contract can be submitted, we do expect good standards of contract management as well, and that contracts have really clear start and end dates. And I suppose equally as important that they're reviewed regularly as well. You'll notice from the 1st of September that this will now start to capture any end dates or on contracts or agreements, and that's going to be really useful to understand some of the sort of different varying lengths and terms that are being used across the sector at the moment. So please do look out for that. I think one other important thing to note, because we can see renewals mentioned on the screen as well, that when an academy trust renews an existing contract with a supplier, that's reported to the ESFA in the same way as all new contracts are. So the same principles really that we've just talked about now, that it's reported before the renewal commencement date and that it's in advance of the renewed terms coming into effect. If we could just move to the next slide, please. Perfect. So the second theme we look at is procurement. Again, this is referenced in the trust handbook for this year under 2.4 and 2.26, under the kind of three requirements that are on screen. So summarised as trust must ensure spending is for its intended purpose and that there is propriety in the use of public funds and perceived conflict of interest. Spending decisions should represent value for money, and that a competitive procurement procedure is in place and incorporated into the trust financial framework. In terms of the actual evidence or documents that can help to support compliance for this, a key one is a copy of the trust financial policy or procurement policy. Again, this is a really key document as part of our assessment that helps us understand the procurement route that should be followed for for transactions of that value. What we're also looking for as well alongside that policy of evidence that the policy was followed. So this could be in the form of quotations if where appropriate in the policy. And what we're looking at is, do the number of quotations align to the requirement within the trust's own procurement policy? When we talk about quotes as well, I think we absolutely acknowledge that in some exceptional circumstances it might not be possible to obtain quotes. This could be, for example, a limited market for that service type, or an urgent or emergency transaction that's required. In those scenarios, I think it's really vital that the trust has a process in place within their policy to manage those circumstances, and if that circumstance is to arise, what evidence is required for that. And again, what we'll do as part of our assessment is look at, I suppose, the specifics to that scenario, and does that evidence match up to what's required as part of the trust policy. A really important one to note on procurement as well, there are additional, I think, statutory requirements or other requirements that we touched on at the start. So Public Contract Regulations 2015 will have specific procurement rules and thresholds required as part of that, and also the finder tender service. So again, when those thresholds are met, which are clearly defined in PCR 2015, that's followed as well. There's lots of best practice and procurement guidance out there. Again, we'll signpost all of this at the end, but I think some of the three key ones that we tend to reference are, there's the buying procedures on procurement law for schools, buying for schools, and actually Crown Commercial Service as well. So all really useful supporting material as well. But like I said, we will definitely make sure we signpost you to those at the end as well. If we could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the third theme that we look at is decision making. So this is to demonstrate that when agreeing RPTs, these are transparent and aligned with the Academy Trust scheme of delegation. This is reflected in the Trust Handbook at 2.25, and it's referenced as internal delegation levels are applied. In terms of practical supporting evidence for that, again, key document to help with that would be a copy of the Trust scheme of delegation. Very similar from how we've just described, I think, the procurement check. That scheme of delegation will absolutely help us identify what process should be followed for that value, and actually who's the delegated authority for purchases at that level as well. It could include in the evidence minutes of any relevant meetings where the decision was made to agree the related party transaction. Where minutes are supplied, what we'll also be looking for or reviewing as part of those minutes is demonstration of how that conflict was managed as well. So if the related party was present or in attendance at any meeting where a decision took place, we'd be looking to identify how was that conflict handled. Was it clearly noted in the trust meeting records? Was that conflict declared? And to make sure that that person was not involved in any decision making as well. So again, just to reference where minutes are supplied, we'll be looking to review that as part of that. I think, again, we acknowledge that some transaction levels might not require a trust board meeting or even another meeting at all. So in these instances where a meeting is not required, email approval is absolutely fine as well. And sometimes even the online form submission itself can be used as decision-making evidence. I think the key there is that where it's the online form, that matches up to the Academy Trust scheme of delegation as well, and that's relevant to the online form user and has that delegated authority within there. Just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the fourth theme our team looks at is identifying conflicts of interest and conflict handling, which we've touched on briefly as well as part of the decision internal delegation levels as well. So again, within the Trust Handbook, this is covered under section 5.45 to 5.48. So again, the Academy Trust Register of Interest must capture relevant business and financial interests of members, trustees, local governors and senior employees. That's at 5.45. And that register must also identify relevant interest from close family relationships between the Academy Trust's members, trustees and local governors, and must be kept up to date at all time. Again, when these are captured, it's about clearly listing the name and nature of the business and the nature of the interest and the date the interest began as well. In terms of the practical evidence or information, again, that you could submit as part of that, that could be a copy of the maintained register. Again, that will really help us to understand that that register's up to date. It captures the RPT relationship which has been submitted, and it clearly evidences that this is recorded as well. What we'll also check as well is where it's relevant, and it's one of the roles where it's required to be published on the Trust website. We will also check that on the Academy Trust website as well. So again, you could either link us to that document as part of your submission. But again, just to reassure, as part of any submission we get, we do look for this ourselves, and where we can minimise any requests for additional information, we'll try to do that as well. Just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And the final theme that we look at is at cost and open book. So this is within the Trust Handbook for this year at 5.49 and 5.59. Just to recover what's in the handbook, so the at cost requirement applies to transactions with a related party exceeding 2,500 cumulatively in one financial year. And a trust must pay no more than cost for goods or services provided to it by the following persons. So that's members or trustees of the Academy Trust, or individuals and organisations related to a member of or trustee of the Academy Trust. What's I think really useful there is at section 5.59 of the Trust Handbook, that provides a full descriptive list of some of those relationships and where cost applies. So I think a helpful point there would be to always check against those relationships listed in 5.59 and does that RPT meet the description within there on that requirement to be at cost. When we talk at cost as well, there are some other relationships where the at cost requirement is also met as well. So where there's academies with a religious designation for the provision of services to protect and develop their religious character and ethos, and this can only be provided by that religious authority, these are regarded as meeting the at cost requirement. And again, for Academy Trust transactions with a college, university or school as a sponsor of the Academy Trust, or transacting with another state-funded school, including academies or college, these are regarded as meeting the at cost requirement as well. Again, in terms of practical evidence or information you could submit to help support with that, the best document to use there is the Statement of Assurance. So again, you can see it on the right of the screen. As part of, I think, the work we do, we'll always, where possible, try and signpost to that Statement of Assurance. Again, that's a really useful resource, as that document will not only confirm it's at cost, but it'll also confirm that it's under an open book agreement as well. Again, that one document can hopefully minimise any additional requests from the supplier in that instance. When you submit on the online form as well, you can indicate through a sort of tick box or check box as you work through the submission that is also on an open book agreement. So a couple of ways to use that one, but absolutely the Statement of Assurance on GovDuty UK, I think, probably the best resource or a really helpful one to use. Just move to the next slide, please. Perfect. So they were the main themes that we use as part of sort of our checks. But again, whilst we've got time today, I think that there's other RPT arrangements that we wanted to talk through, which are declared or require approval through the online form. And these also require separate ESFA approval alongside the RPT requirements. So the first one is the appointing of an AO or CFO who is not an employee of the Academy Trust, and that's at section 1.28 and 3.8 respectively for each role. Again, this wording of that is slightly changed this year, so you may have previously seen that as referred to as an off-payroll appointment. For these arrangements, where the supplier is not a related party, the process for obtaining ESFA approval is done via the ESFA inquiry form, and that's exactly the same as it would have been done previously. When you submit via the inquiry form as well, there's additional information required to support with that appointment and that request. And there is a gov.uk page that lists all of the evidence supporting documents in advance. Again, that will definitely be signposted at the end for us to highlight. Where the supplier is a related party and that appointment constitutes an RPT, then that must be reported via the RPT online form and not the ESFA inquiry form. I think, again, because of some of the changes that Jane touched on for this year, if the off-payroll appointment constitutes an RPT with a school, college, university, that does not require RPT approval, but it still must be declared via the online form. And again, it will still require approval on the off-payroll appointment element. When you declare this transaction through the form from the 1st of September, it will actually ask you now if that appointment is for an off-payroll appointment. What that'll do is really help us identify any RPTs that have been declared as off-payroll appointments, and then what we'll do is update ESFA colleagues in our territorial teams, and what they'll do is then contact you to discuss the information, what's required for that separate off-payroll approval. If you report in an off-payroll appointment with a related party and it is above the £40,000 threshold for 2023, and it isn't one of the educational suppliers that we've kind of referenced right from the start, then that does require advance approval on the related party transaction element. For these types of requests, what you can do to kind of minimise submissions and hopefully any burden that might cause is to submit all supporting evidence through the RPT portal. So in those instances, you can absolutely submit all information for the related party transaction and all information for the off-payroll appointment approval request as well. If we could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the final theme or sort of RPTs that we get through of a different type are novel, contentious and repercussive RPTs, which I'll refer to as NCR for the rest of this slide. So NCR RPTs are subject to separate arrangements, and Academy Trust must obtain ESFA approval for any contracts or other agreements with related parties that are novel, contentious or repercussive, and that's regardless of value. When we use kind of terminology like NCR, I think it's really important just to quickly cover what we mean by NCR. So novel transactions are those of which Academy Trust may have no experience of, or it's outside its normal range of business. Contentious transactions are those that might cause criticism of the trust by Parliament, the public or the media. And repercussive transactions are those that may cause pressure on other trusts to take a similar approach and hence have wider financial implications. So where you as a trust identify that an RPT is novel, contentious and repercussive, again, like I kind of said from the start, must seek ESFA approval, and that must be made to the ESFA before the transaction occurs. If the supplier, as part of that arrangement, is a school, college, university, then again, very similar to the conversation on the off-payroll, then only the NCR element will require ESFA approval. When you declare these transactions via the online form, again, it's a slight change from the 1st of September. It will ask you as part of that submission if you consider that to be a novel, contentious or repercussive transaction. So again, please indicate that on the form. And our team will again work to identify any declarations that have been made and indicated that they could be NCR. And again, we'll work with colleagues in other ESFA teams to contact you and discuss what additional information we need as part of that request. I think one important thing to note is where there is an NCR transaction and approval is required for these types of arrangements, we may need to refer to these transactions or to other government teams such as HM Treasury. So again, I think the message there is please do allow sufficient time for proposals to be considered, as we may need to speak to other government departments as part of that. Just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So whilst we've got the opportunity today, I thought just wanted to share some of the top tips that we provide to trust, or some of the top queries actually as well that we receive. And I think that we try to wrap those up into these 6 that you can see here in front of you. So I'll try and run through them. So starting at the top left, material difference. So where there's a material difference between the reported forecast and actual value of the RPT, then the best course of action is absolutely to contact the ESFA via the inquiry form, because what we may be able to do is potentially look at amending the value of that reported value. Where transactions are on a usage basis, again, it should use previous data to submit a best estimate. However, like we said, we do acknowledge that as part of some arrangements and where forecasting is involved and reporting in advance, that again could lead to a variance over the course of that year. So I think the message there is, where I think you identify that that's happened and you think that that's a material difference, please get in touch with us before reporting additionally, and we'll look at how best we can resolve that for you. Second one on the left is contract length. So when submitting via the online form, trust should submit the full value and contract length of the RPT. And as we touched on right at the start, we can now patch a start and end date to understand that full cost and how that sort of breaks down. So again, as a practical example, if an agreement was to total £60,000 and was £20,000 per year over 3 years, then that would be declared as the £60,000. So again, same principles of that example to apply to varying contracts of length and value. The next one is alternative provision. So where the related party alternative provision supplier is another school, college, university, or it's under the £40,000 threshold, then you do not need to seek prior approval from the ESFA, but again, it must still be declared via the online form. Where this arrangement is provided as part of the local authority fair access protocol and the approving threshold is reached, then you should provide evidence of this arrangement via the online form. Again, we understand that potentially as part of some of these arrangements with the local authority, there may not be an opportunity to procure from a different supplier. And as a result, again, if you can indicate that there it is via the fair access protocol, via the online form, and again, for those types of scenarios, we would not necessarily expect to see evidence of procurement or decision making of part of your submission. If we just tackle the top right one, so again, advanced submissions, I think I've referenced that a couple of times now, so I will fly through that one, but again, you can submit for 23-24, but very, very shortly you'll be able to submit for 24-25 from the 1st of September. Submitting evidence, again, we work towards a 10-day SLA, and we really do want to resolve the queries as timely as possible without any delay. By submitting all of that required evidence, that just helps mitigate any further requests for more information or any delay that might cause. Again, just to reassure any trust, if you're on the call, that when we work through an assessment, we do look at previous submissions as well. So it might be that we hold key documents already on file, such as a scheme of delegation, such as a procurement policy, and we'll always look to, I think, like I said earlier, reduce any requests for information where we might already have that information. So that's just one thing to note. And finally, statutory payments. So where goods or services are statutory services, this might be rates of some sort, council tax, or other services that can only be provided by the local authority. Again, very similar to the guidance what I've talked through around alternative provision. If you could please detail that in your submission. Again, as some of those services are statutory, there may not be the opportunity for you as a trust to procure those services elsewhere because of the nature of the services being provided. Again, if you detail that in submission, and we will adapt our approach, and then might not require any procurement or decision making evidence for those types of arrangements. Just move to the next slide, please. Okay. Thank you. So that's again not one for I think for me to run through all of those now, or we absolutely will run out of time today. But again, that's some of the key, I think, support and guidance that's out there. Alongside of that as well, there is like I've touched on, certainly in terms of procurement, a whole host of other things as well. So again, we'll make sure that this is shared afterwards, and if there are additional guidance we can provide us that, I'll make sure we try and wrap that up into there as well. But again, definitely useful resources in there. The off-payroll appointment one, second down from the right, is again referenced earlier as part of any off-payroll appointment decisions. That will list all of that evidence there. But again, we'll share that after. Just want to next slide, please. So that was the end of the presentation part of today. So what that does is still gives us, we've still got 15 minutes left. So what we can do is, whilst we've got this opportunity, look through some of the questions that you've been raising in the chat, and hopefully we've managed to capture most of these. And what we can do is kind of look at those questions now and where the answers are. And again, if I can talk through them or add any additional context when we've got time, I will do that as well. So if you can just bear with me whilst I navigate through. Please bear with me while I just go through. So yeah, so I'll start with the I think question that's had the most likes on it. So there's a question there. It says, please can you reconfirm your point earlier on slide 3, remove the cumulative element, i.e. the £40,000 approval threshold only applies to single transactions. Having reviewed 5.2 in the ATH, this is not clear that this is not aggregated. Okay, I think we have responded to that one, but again, just to clarify, I think for 23-24, that yeah, that hopefully we have made it clear. So apologies if it's not been, but yes, for the new academic year, that the approval will only need to be sought if that exceeds that value exceeds £40,000. So again, there is no cumulative element for the upcoming academic year. So again, if that was to exceed 40,000 with 2 suppliers, then that again would still be under the approval threshold for each of those individual transactions. Jane, I don't know if there's anything additionally you wanted to add on that one from a policy perspective. I can stay on camera, so no concerns there.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. So if you're submitting multiple transactions with the same supplier, so supplier A, and you have 3 transactions that you need to submit. Previously, we would have aggregated the value of those transactions. So on the current process, where the value exceeds £20,000, you would need to seek approval. So if your first transaction currently, for example, was 19,000, that first transaction wouldn't need approval. But your second transaction with supplier A, so you're the same supplier, if that transaction then was £10,000, although it was under the 20,000 threshold, because it's with the same supplier, we've aggregated those 2 transactions together. So combined, that would exceed the threshold. So what we've done is we've moved that aggregation. So it is purely where there is a single transaction with a same supplier, and that transaction now needs to exceed £40,000. Hopefully that's a little bit clearer.
Perfect, thanks, Jen. So the next one is, apologies. Yeah, so there is a question here about saying to repeat the alternative provision point as wasn't clear. So again, I'll try and I can respond to that because I talked through that. So yeah, so I think in terms of alternative provision, I think a different way maybe to maybe explain is that I think as we know as by nature of that service that's being provided is in most instances that is normally provided, I think, by another school and an academy trust, college or university. So where the supplier is one of those entities, then that doesn't require approval from the ESFA. So again, if that alternative provision is being provided by another academy trust for that arrangement, then that needs only to be declared. So I don't know if that was sort of the question. I think what, again, to tackle it in two parts as well, that we understand as well that alternative provision placement might be done through the local authority, and they'll be done through their fair access protocol, where potentially you as an academy trust, that is not a service that you procure or sort of go out to tender on or have any kind of decision-making authority or sort of decision-making as part of it, and that it's delegated, it's decided by the local authority as part of their fair access protocol. So hopefully what I suppose the message we were trying to get through there is where that is the case and it is done through the LA, that we wouldn't expect evidence of procurement or decision making because we appreciate that it might not be relevant to that type of arrangement. So I think there was two parts to that. One, to consider who is the supplier for the alternative provision, because that might determine that it actually doesn't require advance approval, it just needs to be declared. And if it is via the local authority, then again, we wouldn't expect evidence of procurement because we understand that you may not be able to go out and openly procure those services. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit. I appreciate there was 2 points in one when we captured it before, so hopefully splitting them out gives a bit more clarity. Just go through, we're still okay for a few more minutes. So there was a question, do the new rules commence 1st of September specifically? So for example, an agreement that's signed today but doesn't actually commence, or the contract is from the 1st of September, does that fall under the new rules or the current rules? That's a really good question, actually. So if that contract transaction agreement starts the 1st of September, which from that description it does sound like that, then that would be from the new requirements. What I would say as well is, whilst we're in this I suppose transition period, if you like, we're moving from requirements within the 22-23 handbook to 23-24 with some considerable changes as well, hopefully positive changes, that will, as part of those arrangements, we are applying sort of common sense handling to that and looking at that arrangement, even if it was just fall within the Trust Handbook 22-23, we will consider, is that impacted by 23-24, and make sure, I think, our advice is, I suppose, sensible in that type of arrangement. But again, for that question asked, I think the answer is yes, that sounds like it's under the 1st of September 23 requirements. Just try and tackle another. I can see a question on income as well. So it's the question says, I know that income from an RPT needs to be declared from the instruction at the beginning. Would this include rental income, and would this need to be reported as on the online form as well as in the financial statements? So again, I think we managed to, we have responded to that one. So again, income RPTs absolutely not in scope of the reporting requirements via the online form, in terms of declaring or seeking advance approval. I think the key point there, I think, that's in the answer though, is income RPTs still do need to be noted in the trust financial statement. Again, there's really detailed guidance within the Academy's account direction that will support with preparing for those trust annual financial statements, and hopefully give that guidance. What I'll do, because I think we are running very close to time, I appreciate we've probably not, looks like we have hopefully been able to respond to most of the questions that were posted. Again, just I suppose only time really to fly by a number of those now, but again we tried to focus on the ones with the most sort of likes on them. So that really, I think, brings to the end of sort of mine and Jane's part today. What I just wanted to say, I suppose, really quickly, first of all, is thank you to everyone who's attended today. So again, I think over 200 people on the call, so thank you so much for giving us your time today and listening to us talk through related party transactions. I genuinely hope it's been useful, and again, great to see so many questions and people engaging. Just a quick thank you to the Power Hour team as well for helping coordinate for today and giving us this opportunity to discuss. And again, thank you to other ESFA colleagues on the call who've been supporting in the background and answering the questions and helping pull things together. So again, thank you for that. All of the comments that you've, I think, raised, any questions, absolutely, we'll definitely be taking those away. Again, that's really going to help us to, I think, adapt and improve how we engage and how we interact. There's also going to be a survey shared really shortly, which I know Natalie will mention as well. And what we've done specifically there is just put a couple of questions in relating to related party transactions. Those questions really, if you could tell us what you would like to know more on RPT. So again, we've done a broad theme today of the policy changes and some of the themes. But if you think there's something specifically you would like to know more about and we can capture it in more detail and sort of take that time, then please let us know, and absolutely we'll look to accommodate that. And again, one thing we want to know is just the impact of today's presentation on your overall knowledge of the reporting requirements. So again, we've just captured that in the survey as well, just to consider from the start of today versus the end. Hopefully that's seen a positive shift and impact. So I say thank you one final time, I promise now, and I will hand back to the Power Hour team. But thank you to everyone for attending.
Great, thank you very much, Jane and Lee, for that excellent presentation. It was great, and thanks for answering all those questions. So the link to the survey that I mentioned and Lee's mentioned earlier should now be in the chat. So whilst you take a minute to complete it, I'll let you know about the Power Hours that are coming up. So the next Power Hour event that we have will be about the automation tool, and this will be delivered on Friday the 15th of September at 10 o'clock in the morning. We also have a networking event coming up on the 9th of November and a national event on the 30th of November. So these details should be sent out in September, so keep an eye out for those. And hope to see you all there, and thank you very much for attending.